Well, you probably are aware, but for the first couple hundred years of the American story, at least as a nation, there was a great division created by the white church in regards to the African American church. The African American population, the Christian population, was typically not welcome into the white church. And that created, for several hundred years, a slow and steady split in the culture, the church culture, the white church culture and the black church culture. I don't know if now, though that clearly, the fact that there are two church cultures is the result of sin. That is clear. Is it sin that it still exists? I don't know. I am excited, though, that we are a part of the generation, I think, that has recognized the truth of that is seeking to take steps, and I think that our children, or at least our grandchildren, will experience instead the reunification of a single church culture in the United States again someday in the evangelical world. That is my prayer and my hope. It's an exciting place to be at this place in this conversation. I think one of the most important things for us as a church is when we get to partner with other ministries, to come alongside other ministries, to come alongside other churches, and how to encourage and to be challenged and to learn and grow under their discipleship and leadership and direction. And so I get excited about those opportunities, but honestly, I would get, let's hold off on the slides for a second. I would get excited when people would come and say, hey, there's this really great opportunity coming up. We're going to create this big city-wide event, and we're gonna bring all the churches together, and I've got this great vision, an exciting thing for that. And so at first I would get excited about those, but honestly, by the time I met DeMarcus, I had become kind of jaded. And so I had really gotten into a pattern, as I told you guys a year ago, and I told DeMarcus, and I had to confess to Almighty God, is that I had come to the place of saying, like, when people would come and say, hey, we've got this really exciting thing, blah, 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 I would say, oh, we're all in. We'll be happy to do it. We would love to be a part of that. When it gets to step 2, you let me know, because I knew I was never going to hear from them again. I'd gotten to that place of just really, it was easy. I didn't even tell you guys about all these great opportunities that were going to come up because I knew they weren't going to happen. And so when DeMarcus came, who I did not know at the time, came and we got to know each other, started getting to know each other, and said there's this exciting new thing. And I thought, sure, well, absolutely, yeah, we're all in, assuming that would be all I would hear. But I had underestimated what God was doing through the vessel he had chosen this time in DeMarcus. And sure enough, a few weeks later, DeMarcus like, okay, our first breakfast is at this time. And I showed up and I was like, oh, there's some real, and then about a month later, maybe, I guess, hey, we're going to have another breakfast together. And I show up and it's a packed room full of people all through the community. Like, oh, this is happening. And so I told you guys about it, but I didn't make a big deal about Love Thy City last year. This year, I'm making a big deal about it. I want this to be a ministry that South Spring is all in with. So I've asked DeMarcus to come this morning and tell us several months out about what's coming, about what's going on, so that you guys can have a full picture and know, okay, this is going to become an event that South Spring is intimately involved in. You know DeMarcus, and so we're excited to have him come. If you will, sir, please share with us kind of all that's going on.
Good morning, South Spring. That's a little bit, that's good, but can we give a great praise to our God one more time, South Spring? Yeah, absolutely. I am so excited. I really am. You are my friends. And I often tell people, South Spring, and don't tell my church, is my second home. My second home church. And you know, when you are a part of a church, a part of a ministry, a part of being a part of that ministry is that you give. So the Holy Spirit spoke to me this morning and he said, I want you, when you go to South Spring, you're going to give your tithe to South Spring this morning. And so I brought my tithe and I'm bringing it I gave half of it this morning, giving the second half in the second service to show my love to my church. And he's bringing the tithe box. There you go. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I'm so excited. Thank you, Chris, for inviting us. Love Thy City. What is it? It is the uniting of churches, businesses, nonprofit organizations so that we can come together to transform our city societally and spiritually. We do that by bringing these entities together so that we will be able to share the gospel in a large way. Last year, we were blessed to have over 8,000 people to attend Love Thy City for the first time. And we're excited about this year as we're preparing to go back to the Brookshire Conference Center on July the 19th. As you can see the flyer there. There we go. All right. Love Thy City, July the 19th. We want you to sign up to attend. It is a free, very free conference and a wonderful day for us to be able to show the love to our city. Our children are going to be blessed, and many others will be as well. We're adding a great component to this year. It is an extension, bigger, bolder, and better with Love Fest. Love Fest is going to contain our evangelistic outreach part, kind of like a Billy Graham style. We're going to fill up Rose Stadium. Next slide. We're going to fill it up because Taryn Wells is coming. Jacqueline Carr, live music, wonderful sermons, prayer, and we're going to have wonderful giveaways as we attract many of our youth and young adults. We're going to give away a car. For the first time, we have a sponsor that's going to be giving away a car to a wonderful needed family in a few months. And so we're excited about that. All of the wonderful things we did last year, free food, prayer room, also, the emotional part of our needs is going to be concentrated on our emotional health, our mental health. And so we're excited about that as well. Here's where I need your help. I need volunteers. There are going to be thousands of people at this wonderful event. And we need those of you who have the love of Jesus to get on the ground, to be the hands and the feet of our Savior. Your touch is going to make the difference. And so we're asking that you would please volunteer, sign up, and get in where you fit and be able to help us as we share what's going to be one of the greatest events that has ever hit East Texas. I'm excited about it. You can go to the QR code, go to our website, lovethycity.org, and sign up to be a volunteer. You should have cards if you don't see our table at the end of service, and be a part of that. Our next slide is this: Lunch with Friends. I'm excited about this because on May the 23rd, we're going to be at the Green Acres Crosswalk, and we're going to be raising some wonderful money. And guess what? I've already reserved 32 seats, Chris, for South Spring. 4 tables that I've already reserved. And we're excited about that. And those of you that would like to be a part of that, see Pastor Chris, and he will be able to fill that table up so that we'll be able to definitely be a blessing on May the 23rd. All right. Last but not least, East Texas Giving Day is coming up on Tuesday. Would you remember us? Because helping us helps our community. Helping us helps those who do not know Jesus yet. But on July the 19th, it is declared that Acts 4:21 is going to happen. The gospel was shared and 3,000 souls were added in a single day. That's going to happen because I believe that the saints and those believers who attend are going to be an intricate part of that. Thank you so much, Pastor Chris, for so being a help and a partner with Love Thy City.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir. Thank you. I appreciate you very much, Marcus. Thank you, sir.
Love you, sir.
Okay, so that's the hope, is that we will be involved in that. I would love, I'll be out there all during the morning time, during that whole 11 to 3 time, and I would love to have you guys, to see all of you there as well. This is something that has now happened. It has gone through. We've done one. We've seen it. It's DeMarcus and his team do an excellent job organizing it, marketing it, making all the stuff there to happen. And what we need now are God's people to step in and just to be there, to serve, to take care of all the stuff that has to happen. You can imagine what it takes to run it. If you just let your imagination free for a minute, what it would take if you were in charge of an event like this. And what it takes is hundreds of people. I would prefer it to be thousands of people who are serving and volunteering. And so please, South Spring, get on the website, go ask them out there, check in. And then I need to fill apparently 4 tables at that event. And so make sure you're sending me or Kendall an email and let us know. We will start filling those up, and bring your checkbooks. And we can give a lot of money and help Love Thy City be what we think it's capable of being. And I really appreciate it. I appreciate the partnership, and I appreciate the opportunity to be involved. And yet again, the churches of Tyler coming together for a common mission, where none of the things that so easily divide us get in the way of the mission that we have, the commission, so that we would go and make disciples. All right. So with that in mind, jumping into our passage today in Luke chapter 24. Luke chapter 24, in this passage, the Road to Emmaus passage, is a great passage not only for people who don't know Christ, but the encouragement to us as believers on how we live this out. Because one of the things that this passage does is it challenges our story that we think Jesus should have. One of the things that this passage does is it draws out this desire in us, this tendency in us to tell Jesus' story for him, to create God in our image. We all have preconceptions and often misconceptions of Jesus. Everybody seems to have their own opinion as to what his politics would have been and how he would have voted and what he would be involved in and not involved in and how he would spend his time and his energy and all these different things. We even have misconceptions, which we've unpacked in detail before. I'll just reference here about even what he would have looked like. Maybe you grew up with this image of Jesus hanging on your grandmother's wall. Hundreds of thousands of these have been reprinted and recreated of this picture of Jesus. Now, we don't know what Jesus looked like, so it's technically possible that Jesus might have looked like this. I doubt it. I don't think he would have looked like that. I don't think he'd have looked anything like that. That's not very likely at all that he would have looked like such a good European. With his long flowing brown hair and his very European looking face. I think that's extremely unlikely given that he was a first century Jew. I think there's some other things. Maybe you like the tough, artistic, manly Jesus. Maybe that's the one who you identify with, that you've created him kind of in that image as well. Maybe you grew up with the kind of Roman, medieval Robin Hood version of Jesus. That you would have, he had a bow and arrows that you would be even more comfortable. Maybe you grew up with the extremely white, effeminate version of Jesus. And the next one. Oh, there we go. And maybe that's the kind of magical picture of Jesus as well, that idea. Maybe you grew comfortable or probably not. I doubt if your grandmother would have had a picture like this up on her wall. But when archaeologists went and did restructuring of first century Jewish men's heads, and they created an average and what the average first century Jewish man would have looked like, taking the historical fact that, for example, Jewish men did not wear their hair long in the first century, that would have been a weird trend to wear his hair long at that time, or their beard very long. This is a very good concept. Now, of course, now we know exactly what Jesus looked like. We all have now that we have it, and we've actually gotten to encounter the real one. I think maybe, we see on social media, we see the issue of people saying, like, here's how Jesus got to decide who to like, who to bless based on who liked and shared certain posts. He probably takes up a lot of his day, just keeping track of all of that. Maybe politically, maybe you have an image of him the way he would have been with a certain political perspective, whether it's far one direction or the other direction. Either way, to recognize our misconceptions and preconceptions of what we think Jesus' story is may not be his. It may not be his story. We're always trying to put Jesus in a box that makes us comfortable. Because I don't know about you, but I don't like it when Jesus disagrees with me. I don't like it when Jesus is on a different page than me. I don't like it when I seem to miss the point that he's trying to make. That makes me uncomfortable. It makes me feel like a child who has kind of wandered off somewhere trying to follow my own vision, my own understanding, and my own whatever, and instead I need to be called back to that. And I would encourage you that I think the story of the prodigal son isn't just for lost unbelievers, but for any of us. Because in the story of the prodigal, we have a son who wanders off because he doesn't understand the father. And maybe more potently, we have a son who stays behind and who seems to get it, but his whole motivation is also because he doesn't understand the father. Neither of them do. And when that's us to go, okay, I need to get back in alignment with the story that Jesus tells about himself. This passage is a brilliant depiction of that. So let me read it to you. Starting in Luke 24, starting in verse 13, you can read along. You have Bible with you, or there's copies in the pew in front of you, or the seat in front of you, and it'll be on the screen, hopefully. Verse 13, that very day, two of them were going to a village named Emmaus, and about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and they were talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing together, Jesus himself drew near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, what is this conversation you are holding with each other as you walk? And they stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, named Cleopas, answered him, are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days? He said to them, what things? And they said to him, concerning Jesus of Nazareth, a man who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and rulers delivered him up to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it's now the third day since these things happened. Moreover, some women of our company amazed us. They were at the tomb early in the morning, and when they did not find his body, they came back saying they had even seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but him they did not see. And he said to them, O foolish ones and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory? And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. So they drew near to the village to which they were going. He acted as if he were going farther, but they urged him strongly, saying, stay with us, for it is toward evening, and the day is now far spent. So he went in to stay with them, and when he was at table with them, he took the bread and blessed it and broke it and gave it to them, and their eyes were opened, and they recognized him. And he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, did not our hearts burn within us while he talked with us on the road, while he opened to us the scriptures? And they rose that same hour and returned to Jerusalem. And they found the 11 and those who were with them gathering together, saying, the Lord has risen indeed and has appeared to Simon. Then they told what had happened on the road and how he was known to them in the breaking of bread. All right. What a beautiful story. It is so brilliantly told. This event that happened in the life of these men and women, Luke tells it to us in a fantastic way. I think Luke probably struggled because he was like, how am I going to tell this story for all of its value? I'm probably not going to be able to trick those who are listening and reading into not knowing who Jesus is. Because obviously we know. And so by the time he's telling this story, hey, these two disciples were walking down the road and a random stranger came up behind them. And everyone in the audience is going to go, was it Jesus? Because we already know. He can't tell it in a way that still is shocking to us as it is to them. Because we already have that understanding. So he tells it in a way instead that allows us, honestly, kind of a chuckle at the expense of these two disciples several times. And I think that's on purpose. I think Luke is giving us kind of a light moment. Last couple of chapters, they've been a little heavy. And here he's going to give us a little bit of a comic relief, but at the same time, a way to challenge us. Verse 13, when he starts that very day, isn't that amazing? This is still Sunday. This is the day Jesus rose from the grave. And now, again, you don't know the timeline yet if you haven't already read through it. You don't have that. All you have is the fact that there are two disciples and they're going to Emmaus. That's an amazing timeline. He gives us the setting immediately. This helps us correct, hopefully I want to help us today with some context, correct our tendency in the church, as was my tendency for years, that when I see a passage like this in the Bible, here's what I hear is some people went someplace. And then they came back from that place. And the place means nothing to me. And until you begin to engage with Scripture through the lens of geography as well, it's easy for us to miss some context. So we don't know where, by the way, the irony is we don't know where Emmaus was. You can't go visit Emmaus. No one knows where it was. Exactly. There's several good arguments that are made for several of them. And you go, well, how hard could it be, Chris? It's 7 miles west of Jerusalem. How hard would that be to find that? Well, we don't know if it's 7 miles there and 7 miles back, or if it's 7 miles there and back. That creates a crisis for us. Emmaus can mean hot springs, and so that should help, but the problem is that part of Israel has lots of hot springs around. There's all kind of hot springs. They're in a kind of a volcanic basin up there. So like there's all kinds of opportunities for that. I'll add a little even more confusion. Later versions of the Bible, probably because they thought they had found Emmaus, made it 160 stadia, not 60 stadia. And so that creates extra confusion for us as well. The truth is we don't know. There's different opinions on where, and I'm going to give you mine. My opinion is that where Emmaus isn't what matters. What Emmaus meant to first century Jewish men, that's what matters. So let me share that with you. In 167 BC, so about 200 years before these events, in 167 BC, there was the Jewish zealots following a man by the name of Judas Maccabeus began to defy and even fight against the Greeks who occupied them at the time. The Greeks then are like the Romans at the time of Jesus. They occupied Israel and they controlled it. And the Maccabees led a revolt against the Greeks. And they had had 2 small victories, and now they were about to face their first real challenge. A large army of Greeks had stationed themselves in a little town called Emmaus. And the Jewish rebels were near the city of Jerusalem. They then made sure that the Greek army knew where they were. And then they waited. And when the Greek army began to leave their camp to come and attack these handful of Jewish rebels, they then tricked them, went a different route that they knew, and attacked Emmaus while it was largely unguarded, while the massive of the army was gone. And they attacked it and decimated it and stole all the supplies and all the weapons and everything they needed to continue the rebellion. And in many ways, because of Emmaus, they were able to continue the revolt. And in the end, eventually the Greeks gave up and left. Partially because the Romans were also coming in, which turned out not to be a great thing, but everything else. This was a big deal. So Emmaus, for first century Jewish men, is honestly probably a lot like the Alamo is for us. That if we said, hey, we're going to gather somewhere as Texans and we're going to declare ourselves an independent nation again, apart from America, where should we gather? I don't think there's any question that we would gather in San Antonio. That's where we would gather. Remember the Alamo, right? That's where we would go and gather. And I think that may be what's going on here, because I think, my opinion is, these 2 men had realized that the story of Jesus of Nazareth was over. The story of Jesus of Nazareth is over. We thought he was the Messiah. Turns out, not so much. So we need to start over, and we need to tell a new story. We were looking for a Moses to set his people free. And that's not what happened. Jesus didn't overthrow their Egypt. Instead, he was defeated by their Egypt. And maybe they need to start over. Now, we can't know for sure if that's what it was, why they left. But that's my opinion, is that they were going to the Alamo to start over and look for a new Messiah. Colson said he thought maybe they just had a tea time the next morning, maybe the next Monday morning at 8, and you can't miss those kind of things. I said I might be stepping on too many toes if I said I think their kids probably had a sporting event in Emmaus, and that was why they. Sorry. All right. So here we go. Verse 14. They were talking with each other about these things that had happened. And while they were talking and discussing together, Jesus himself drew near. There's a great picture. He's setting up a punchline for us. These 2 guys are walking to Emmaus. They're talking about all of this kind of stuff. And a stranger kind of comes walking up behind them, listening to their conversation. And they look back, that's kind of weird. He's kind of closing in, kind of weird, but they don't recognize him. And this is clearly meant to be a miracle, that he is being hidden from them supernaturally, his identity to them. But their eyes were kept from recognizing him. People, now, why? Why would this be necessary? This isn't just some prank Jesus is pulling on a couple of his disciples. Again, just like Jesus went and restored Thomas in his doubts and his skepticism, and just like Jesus restored Peter, here 2 others of Jesus' followers, not the 12, but 2 others of his followers, I think have given up. They're headed to go tell a new story, and Jesus wants to catch up with them and to help them see that they've got it all wrong. But I get this. So let me tell you about an awkward thing that can happen to me sometimes. So I get on an airplane, and I sit down next to a total stranger, and I start talking with them. And at some point, they ask what I do for a living, okay? And when I say I'm a therapist, if I say therapist, the conversation is over. They're done. They go into this weird paranoid, I'm being evaluated mode, and they don't want to talk anymore. Like they shut down. But if I really want to shut them down, I tell them, Pastor, that's right. Because I tell them I'm a pastor, and they are, no thanks. The sound canceling headphones go on, the eye covers go on. They are, and if they foul down on both, you can forget about it, right? They're strapping on a parachute at that point. They're ready to go. I think Jesus here wants them to learn the lesson from His Word, not knowing who He is. Not having the challenge, the confusion of having to engage with the risen Jesus yet. He wants them to see this purely from Scripture, which is really powerful. Now, of course, you can imagine every commentary and every pastorate here at least asks the question, we need to ask ourselves, are we missing Him? Is He right there with us, trying to lead us and teach us, and we're not paying attention? Now, in this case, of course, they're supernaturally being kept from recognizing Him. But I think sometimes our own agendas, our own mindsets, our own conclusions, our own dreams and goals and visions can cause us to miss Him as well. Okay, verse 17, and He said to them, what is this conversation you're holding with each other as you walk? And they stood still, looking sad. What a great picture. He's caught up with them. He's kind of there, leans in. Hey, what are y'all talking about? And isn't this interesting? These two men walking down the road stop right there in the middle of the road. And what defines them in that moment is how sad they look, how brokenhearted they are. Standing there, Jesus has just walked up and they're brokenhearted. It's meant to be kind of almost funny. Like, what are you sad about? Jesus is in a conversation with you now. You shouldn't be sad. But they're brokenhearted in this. And they asked, then one of them, named Cleopas, answered him, are you, which is a question, by the way, are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened in these days? This, I think, is meant to be funny. They're asking Jesus, how do you not know what's been happening? And you can imagine Jesus is like, no. I am the only one who does know what's been happening. I'm literally the only person who understands the last few days. None of y'all get it. You want me to prove it? You're walking to Emmaus. You have absolutely no idea what just happened, as is proven by where you are right now and what you're doing. Let me tell you what happened over the last few days. I happened over the last few days. That's what's been happening the last few days is me. And so they're just totally blind, confronting Jesus on His ignorance of recent events. That's meant to be kind of funny. Like, wow, these guys. Now, you go, okay, so let's find out a little bit more about Cleopas. I would love to share with you more about Cleopas. We just don't know anything about him. It may be that he's referenced as a husband of one of the Marys in John 19:25. The language actually says Mary of Cleopas. So he could be her dad, brother, son, or husband. It's impossible to know for sure. We run into this constantly as we've talked about, which Marys are where. We're going to reference that again in a moment. Over time, the tradition of him, that, by the way, and that may not even be him. It's just a similar nickname to his, like Beth or Betty or Ellie or Liz, or all those things can be parts of for a name for Elizabeth. Well, these names may be the same guy. They may not be. Over time, tradition has guessed at his identity so many different ways. Church tradition has had him being the brother of Joseph. Some of them have had him being the father of Mary. We really don't know, or even the stepfather of Mary. We just don't know who he is. What for us is significant is to remember that yet once again, the original audience did know who he was. They all knew Cleopas. Oh yeah, Cleopas. Oh, I've heard this story. This is a good one. Let's listen to this. This is a good story right now about Cleopas. You're going to like this story. And whoever is with him. Who's disciple number 2? Here's the thing, by the way, I'm going to reference in a minute. I would sure love for Cleopas or this other disciple to have been at the Last Supper. It's not necessary. But they're not one of the 12. That we know for sure. It's not one of the 12. So maybe someone else was there and we don't know about it. Maybe there was a room full of people and we don't know about it. I'll explain why I hope he was there at one point. But about disciple number 2, we know even less. We don't even have a name. People have guessed that this is his wife or his son or someone else well known. But again, the original audience would have known exactly who the other disciple was who was with them. It's wild to me. People get upset sometimes about the side characters that are woven into The Chosen, the story of The Chosen. People get upset like these side characters. The actual mistake is there should be dozens more side characters, not less. There were side characters everywhere, hundreds of people coming in and out of their lives, following for a while, being followers of Jesus. And we know that at his resurrection, probably at his ascension, that's my opinion on when it happened, but sometime during the resurrection, his ascension, he hung out with 500 disciples. And so this is there should be dozens more. That's going to be normal. Judas is dead. It can't be one of the 12. Judas is dead. The 10 are in Jerusalem. And Thomas isn't going to believe that he's risen at his first opportunity. So it can't be any of them. We're going to see that. Again, maybe the Last Supper. I'll explain in a moment. So verse 19, he said to them, after this, they say, are you the only one who doesn't know about what's been going on? In verse 19, Jesus says to them, well, what things? And they said to him concerning Jesus of Nazareth, a man who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and rulers delivered him up to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the third day since these things happened. Remember how I said that we all have a story about Jesus that we tell? Well, now we know theirs. Their story of Jesus is a tragedy. He was a Moses figure. He rose up. God raised him up as a prophet to set his people free. And he died. They are left in confusion and disappointment because their story about Jesus doesn't match the story that happened. By the way, anyone else? I read that, they're confused, they're disappointed, and I'm like, yeah, bro, me too. I don't know about you, I've said many times before, I don't think Jesus will never fail us. But we'll be disappointed all the time. It is a normal thing to be disappointed in what Jesus is doing. Man, that's not how I would have done it. That's not what I would have done. If I was in charge around here, we'd have done this. I can't believe this is happening, or that's not happening, or I can't believe, I get that. They're feeling that because, by the way, I have a story on how I think Jesus should act in certain situations. This is what Jesus should do. This is who he should heal. This is what he should take care of. All the different stuff. And I'm really disappointed when he decides to do things different than that. This was their story. He had come to redeem them. Just like the Maccabees had redeemed them from the Greeks, and just like Moses, especially Moses. This is a big one. So, li trustai, the Greek word for liberate, to set free is the word they use here, to redeem, to liberate and set free. Now, as a good Jewish audience, you already know. Where does a Jewish mind go when you're thinking in terms of redemption? Well, of course, Exodus. They go to Exodus, especially if it's Passover week. Look at Exodus chapter 6. Say therefore to the people of Israel, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under burdens of the Egyptians, and I will deliver you from slavery to them, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great acts of judgment. Anybody recognize this passage? This is the Passover passage. The entire Passover dinner is based on the 4 I will statements of Exodus chapter 6. That's the entire thing. And again, when is this? When was Jesus crucified? Passover. Everything is focusing on this. In fact, if you want to have even more fun, the first non-Sabbath day of Passover, because Passover is a 7-day feast. So you have the Passover Sabbath. In the case of this year, I believe there's also then a weekly Sabbath. There's an annual Sabbath, a weekly Sabbath, my opinion. And then the first non-Sabbath day in the Jewish tradition is the Feast of the First Fruits, when they honor what God has brought to them from the earth. That's Sunday. Jesus was resurrected from the dead on the Feast of First Fruits. We'll reference that again in a moment. So here now, Jesus has come. They're traveling on the Feast of First Fruits. Again, for whatever reason, we've looked at that, maybe the possibility. But they're all thinking, this is the story of Egypt. We were living out the story of the people of Israel with Moses. We had our Moses. We've been counting. They've got 49 days until Pentecost. And then the 50th day, meaning that's where Pentecost comes from. We've been waiting for this. They're counting it, just like Leviticus 23 told them to do. They're doing this countdown. They've gotten to like day 3 or 4. And today, this day in the passage, is the day of first fruits. And they're going to Emmaus. And it should have been a day of great celebration when they were set free of the Romans. And instead, Moses is dead. That's not how the story goes. Right? I mean, if you sat down with your kids, you start telling the story of Moses. And Moses went before Pharaoh. and his staff turned into a snake, and Pharaoh killed him. The end. You'd be like, Grandpa, you read that wrong, right? That's not how the story goes. That's not how that, no, we don't, he's not supposed to die in the story. That's not how the story goes. And so they are demoralized. They had hoped, and their hopes are dashed. Notice they refer to Jesus as a prophet, not the Messiah anymore, not the Son of God anymore, a man who's a prophet. Verse 22, moreover, some women, now you want to be really confused, stranger? Moreover, some women of our company amazed us. They were at the tomb early in the morning, and when they did not find his body, they came back saying that they had even had a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were there with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but him they did not see. Can you imagine how humorous this is to Jesus? Oh, did they? What, the tomb was empty? Oh my gosh, how could that be? Did anyone warn you about that? That was going to happen? Anyway, so they left after, I love that they left after hearing from the women. They're still no, like Colson said, tea time, can't miss those, right? This teachable moment for us men and women. Just as a side note, do you think, ladies, you get to have another moment just like you did last week of typical, right? Typical men. Do you think the women came back and said, we had a vision of angels? I think they came back and said, we saw angels. And the men interpret that as they must have had some kind of vision, right? Because it can't be the way they told it. Let me save your marriage. Listen to the way they say it. That's a good one. All right, so no extra charge for that. Mirror what they say, not your interpretation. No extra charge. I just think that's wild. They have this editorial comment mixed in here. They must have had a vision of angels. And Jesus is like, is that what they said? Because when I left, there were angels there. Apparently your ladies just had a vision though, I guess. Okay, I had this thought too. There's a dead body missing and they're leaving town. Maybe that's part of it. The other disciples are hiding behind a locked door because they're afraid. Maybe they're getting out of Dodge because they're afraid. Now maybe they're courageous. Maybe it's courage. Maybe that's why they're not behind the locked door. But I think it's more likely that they're thinking, we got to start over anyway. Let's get out of town before the Jews and the Romans find us. Anyway, we have the timeline now. Jesus resurrected sometimes early on Sunday. The women, don't know exactly how many women or exactly what order this happened. Joanna, Mary Magdalene, probably Mary the mother of Jesus, Mary the mother of Joseph, Mary the wife of Clopas, whoever that is. It's hard for us to know how many of them are which, especially which Marys went to tend the dead body and which ones didn't. And two angels spoke to them and told them he had risen. By the way, if Mary, mother of Jesus, was there, how that must have just filled her heart with hope to hear that her son had risen. We also know that Mary Magdalene had a run-in with him after the other women had left, but apparently they didn't know about that yet. They went back and told the disciples. Two of the disciples then ran to the tomb, confirmed that the tomb was empty, then came back confused, upset, and at that point, these two guys head for Emmaus. It just strikes me as wild. They're confused and they have no way to interpret it. I think Jesus is still walking around behind him because I think otherwise their interpretation, the dramatic eye roll or head slap that he had at their interpretation of events would have given him away. That's just wild. And he says to them in verse 25, "O foolish ones, and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory?" Now, the word foolish here is not the insult word that he tells us not to use. It's a different word. This word literally means without a mind. Nous means mind. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, nous. And this is nous, no mind, okay? And by the way, isn't it interesting that he does command us to love the Lord our God with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength? And here he specifically says, "O mindless ones with slow hearts." They're not getting it. They're not loving him with all their heart, mind, soul, and strength. I love your strength, but your mind and your heart just aren't getting it. In other words, you're making great time, but you're going in the wrong direction. Hey, they reference the prophets. He references the prophets too, but something they claim Jesus to be, by the way, one of Jesus' prophecies was that he would raise from the dead on the third day. Apparently they didn't believe he was that much of a prophet, or they might have believed that. So he then explains to them. Starting in verse 27, and beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. Notice, this is significant. He's going to proclaim himself. He does not start with Adam. He does not start even with Abraham. He starts with Moses, the Redeemer. That's who they've confused him with. They think he's going to set them free of Rome the way that they were set free, the way that the Jews were set free of Egypt. The Redeemer they were looking for. Oh, Jesus, though they don't know what Jesus says, but if you understood Moses, you would know the story's different. If you really understood. I think this is like, I don't know if how many of you are mystery readers. I love a good mystery story. The Rex Stout Nero Wolfe mysteries are my favorite. I've read them all out loud to Ginger. They are the best. They're so good. And part of what makes them so great is when it explains how the detective Nero Wolfe knew who the murderer was way back in like chapter 2. And how he knew already who the murderer was. And when they read it, you go, well, obviously, how could anyone have missed it? I mean, I did. With all 45 books, I missed it. And yet somehow it's so obvious once it's explained how you do it. This may have been what they were thinking. Oh my gosh, it's obvious. Of course he had to suffer. Wait, you're telling us that the story we thought was over was actually part of the story? Wait, when we thought the story was ending, you're telling us, no, it's just beginning. He had to suffer. He convinces them that this needed to happen. This is exactly what needed to happen. He wants them to see the story is the right one and it's far from over before he even reveals himself. Verse 28, so they drew near to the village to which they were going. He acted as if he were going farther, but they urged him strongly, saying, stay with us, for it is toward evening and the day is now far spent. And he went in to pray with them. Now, there's debate on whether Jesus is pretending to move on or whether he was really going to move on. The Greek is a little unclear. It has a word that can mean like to pretend something. I think it's as simple as this. I think Jesus is just saying the words that he knows in their culture will trigger them inviting him to stay. That in the same way that when you slowly reach for your wallet at lunch, you're inviting the other person to offer to pay, right? We all know that. When you're like, do I need to get this? That they're supposed to say, no, I've got it, right? And so we all pretend to slowly reach for our wallets. It's the same kind of thing. I think Jesus is like, well, I guess it's time for me to be going. And of course, their response is, no, you need to stay with us. No, you need to stay here with us. And he does. And by the way, it's kind of fascinating. He then is going to take the role of the leader of the meal. Now, what that means, we don't know. What's going on here? Verse 30, when he was at table with them, he took the bread and blessed and broke it and gave it to them. And their eyes were opened and they recognized him. And he vanished from their sight. So he wanted to correct their thinking before revealing himself, and here he breaks bread and they see it. There's kind of an obvious connection to communion here, kind of like when the Ethiopian in Acts chapter 8, when he needs the Bible interpreted to him, it's done well, and immediately it's followed with baptism. Here, they hear God's word interpreted them well, and most people relate this somehow to the Passover, communion, Lord's Supper. Now, it may not be. Maybe it has no connection whatsoever. But now you see why it's kind of cool to me if one of them at least was at the Last Supper and they see Jesus break the bread and they're like, oh, I've seen that. That's familiar. Now, the truth is, if they've been with Jesus for several years, they've seen Jesus break bread 1,000 times. So it could just be that simple. But whether it's triggered or whether it's purely a supernatural removing of the veil from their eyes, they immediately know who he is. But before they can speak, he's gone. He did his job. He corrected their direction. You guys have got it wrong. Just like he's going to do with Thomas, just like he's going to do with Peter, he's going to correct their misunderstanding of the moment and bring them back to him. He doesn't want to lose these two because once Jesus chooses somebody, how many does he lose? None. And so he's not going to lose these two. They've wandered off like sheep who have left the path. And like the good shepherd, he's going to go, no, tap them back, tap you back. No, come on back. And that's what he does with them. He brings them back. And in fact, it's kind of wild what they respond with. The minute he's gone, they say to each other, did not our hearts burn within us while he was talking to us on the road when he was opening to us the scriptures? I think this is significant. Yes, of course, this is Jesus teaching through scripture. It is a frustration to every Bible teacher and every Christian of all time that no one thought to write it down. No one wrote down Jesus' interpretation of Moses to his current era about how that works. Like, I'd like to have a copy of that, please. We don't have it, but they see it. Here's what I think is key. It isn't that it's Jesus that causes their hearts to burn. It is the truth of Scripture that does it. I think that's wild. I think that's part of why he doesn't want them to know it's him, is so that they can see the power of his holy word in their lives. And so that's meant to be the intention. When we get to in a minute and we say, what kind of application should we have from this passage? Here's one: get into his word and study deeply. I will tell you, one of my favorite things about being a pastor is those moments when I'm studying and I'm preparing the sermon and something that becomes clear to me in the passage sets my heart on fire. And if you're a teacher and you've ever experienced that, it's like an addiction. You want more and more. You dig more and more. You want his Spirit to be fanned into flame in your heart more and more. So if you don't have another clear application from this, that's one. Get into his word. Study it deeply. Dig into it. You'll find yourself doing that. Did not my heart burn within me? The prophet Jeremiah references his word, his message being like a fire caught up in his bones. By the way, when the Scripture creates a burning in your heart, you act. When it really does, you act. You may not want to. When His Spirit speaks to you and you accept it as authority, you act. You go and you reconcile with that person with the broken relationship. You go and make things right there. You pray. You confess. You act. This is, by the way, meant to be, I think, almost straight comedy, the way this last little bit happens. Alistair Begg brings a wonderful attention to this. He spends even longer than I'm going to with it, but it's a great picture. So here they are, they're sitting there, they've just broken, they've got literally a meal sitting in front of them, and Jesus vanishes from their midst, and they're like, oh, it was Jesus. That's who that was. And our hearts are on fire, and we need to share this news with somebody. This is some amazing stuff. And so it says that pretty much immediately, it says within the hour, they jump back up. Remember, this evening. And they got 7 miles probably to go. And they're on foot. So they jump up, and I can only imagine run back towards Jerusalem. And so they're excited. They've got this news. Remember, there's this confusion. The women had this vision of angels, and the vision told them that Jesus had been raised from the dead, and the tomb was empty. They now know why. They know why the tomb is empty. Jesus was raised from the dead. He came and spoke with us. He interpreted Scripture for us. This is amazing. And they're going to run home, and you can imagine all the way there, they're talking like, what are you going to say? What am I going to say? Like, you say this part, I'll say this part, and then you say this part. So how should we play this? Should we walk in real casually like, hey, so what's been going on with you guys? Or do we just jump straight in like, he's risen, he's risen, he's risen, he's risen? Like, how are we going to come at this? Are we going to play it cool? We're going to come in all excited? And I think Luke very intentionally tells us the way this played out because I think it's meant to be funny. So they rush back. They run up the stairs. They bang on the locked door. The disciples open the door, and here's where it goes. And they rose the same hour and returned to Jerusalem. They found the 11 and those who were with them gathered together, and the 11 were saying, the Lord has risen indeed and has appeared to Simon. You can imagine they're like, oh, you already know? We just ran 7 miles to tell you. So they're like, we ran all this way, but before they could say a word, they tell them, you guys are just back. You won't believe it. Jesus is risen. And they're like, oh, okay. Yeah. Well, let's talk. Because we got some stuff to share. Not as big a news as we thought, but we've still got some stuff to talk about. And I think it's meant to be like that. We're seeing these real life human beings responding to this miracle in real live ways. It's a new story. So now they sit down, verse 35, and they told what had happened on the road and how he was known to them in the breaking of the bread. They now have confirmation. By the way, we don't know about this conversation with Simon. By the way, notice he's still Simon and not Peter. That happens at the restoration. But Jesus apparently appeared to Simon sometime in that Sunday that we don't know anything about. It's referenced one other time, but the narrative of it is never given to us. We don't know what happened there. They come, they share that, they're very excited. Remember that they stood still looking sad. That's what's changed. In an afternoon, they stood still looking sad. The story is over. Moses is dead. Egypt has won. What do we do now? I guess we start a new story. And now they have run 7 miles to proclaim to their friends, the story isn't over. We're right here in the middle of it. The story is ongoing. People have noticed over and over again how this story, the story of Emmaus, mirrors the Christian walk for all of us, not just them. That it's there and it mirrors that. We live in this disappointment and even this despair. Our lives have failed. What we placed our trust in seems to have failed us. Then Jesus draws near, though we don't recognize him at first. We begin to understand his gospel. We begin to see the truth of his word from Scripture. And then he is revealed through his word and through his fellowship. And there's the hope of a new story. The soul connection is ignited, and now we get to join into this story that we've never gotten to be a part of before. And then action to gather with others and to tell others about this good news is the result. It fits very well with most of our stories. So the early followers understood. It turns out we aren't without hope. He was the Messiah. We just didn't understand it. We didn't get it. Look at what Paul says in Colossians chapter 1. This isn't just about Rome, is it? Giving thanks to the Father who has qualified you to share in the inheritance of the saints in light. He has delivered us from the domain of darkness and transferred us to the kingdom of his beloved Son, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. See, he did come to redeem his people, to take them out of one place and put them where they belong. But that wasn't about Rome. Listen, nations come and they go. Countries, they rise up. Empires, they rise up and they go away. That's always happened through history. But because of Christ, now the cosmic enemies of sin and death, we've been purchased from them. He's delivered us from the domain of darkness and transferred us to the kingdom of his beloved Son. That's the invitation, is to be welcomed into that exodus from darkness to his light.